The slap echoed through the crowded Seoul marketplace like a gunshot. For 3 seconds, the world held its breath. Vendors froze mid-haggle. Shoppers paused with vegetables suspended in their hands. And somewhere in the distance, a merchant's radio crackled with static. And at the center of it all stood Arya, her palms still tingling, her chest heaving with righteous fury, staring down the most dangerous man in Seoul without knowing it. She had been living in Korea for 8 months, working 3 jobs to send money home to Lagos, navigating a world that often looked at her dark skin with curiosity, or worse, indifference. She had learned to be invisible, to keep her head down, to survive. But what had just happened crossed every line she had sworn never to let anyone cross again. Before we dive into how one slap changed 2 lives forever, make sure you subscribe to K-Drama Fairy Tales and hit that notification bell so you never miss our most thrilling stories. Drop a like if you're ready for this intense mafia romance. Now, let's see how Arya's world is about to be turned upside down. It started innocently enough. She had been examining vegetables at a market stall, her canvas bag already heavy with the week's groceries, when she felt someone watching her. She'd turned to find a tall man in an expensive black coat standing too close, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. She'd moved away, putting distance between them, but he'd followed. When she stopped at another stall, he appeared beside her again. The 3rd time it happened, her patience snapped. "Excuse me, do you need something?" she'd asked in her accented Korean, her tone sharp. He'd seemed startled that she'd addressed him directly, and, in his apparent nervousness, he'd reached out and grabbed her wrist. Not gently, but firmly, desperately, like a drowning man clutching at a lifeline. Before she could react, he'd pulled her closer, his other hand landing on her waist in a gesture far too familiar for strangers. His mouth had been near her ear as he stammered something in rapid Korean she couldn't fully understand, but she caught the words "beautiful" and "please," mixed with what sounded like a clumsy attempt at flirtation. But Arya didn't care about his intentions. All she knew was that a strange man had grabbed her without permission, had put his hands on her body without consent, had invaded her space in a way that brought back every uncomfortable moment she'd endured since arriving in this country. Every time someone had touched her hair without asking, every time hands had lingered too long when giving her change, every boundary violation she'd swallowed down to keep the peace. Not this time. So she slapped him, hard, with every ounce of strength her exhausted body could muster, with all the pent-up frustration of 8 months of being treated like an exotic curiosity rather than a person. His head snapped to the side, a thin line of blood appearing at the corner of his perfectly sculpted mouth. The crowd gasped collectively. Someone dropped a bag of rice, and the man, tall and unnervingly handsome with sharp cheekbones and eyes like black ice, slowly turned his face back to her, touching his bleeding lip with 2 fingers. For a moment, Arya thought she saw something flicker in those cold eyes. Surprise, amusement, hunger. Then he smiled. Not a friendly smile, but the kind of smile a predator gives its prey before the chase begins. "Get your filthy hands off me," Arya hissed in English, her accent thick with West African inflection. "I don't care who you think you are. You don't touch women like that." His smile widened, revealing perfect white teeth, stained slightly with his own blood. He stepped closer, ignoring the horrified whispers erupting around them, and spoke in flawless English with a voice like velvet over steel. "I think you've misunderstood the situation, but I admire your fire. What's your name?" She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her shopping bags and turned on her heel, her braids swinging behind her like a warrior's mane as she stormed through the parting crowd. Behind her, she heard his low chuckle, a sound that somehow managed to be both amused and threatening. She didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. Women like her, foreign and alone in this city, couldn't afford to make enemies, especially not with men who wore designer clothes and commanded the fear she'd seen in the merchant's eyes. What Arya didn't know was that the man she'd just humiliated in front of dozens of witnesses was Kang Yuseo, the youngest and most ruthless boss of the Baeko clan, one of Seoul's most feared underground organizations. At 32, he controlled half the city's gambling dens, nightclubs, and protection rackets. He had built his empire through calculated violence and cold strategy, never showing mercy, never showing weakness. He was a ghost in expensive suits, a legend whispered about in back alleys and boardrooms alike, and no one, absolutely no one, had ever dared to strike him. Until this African woman with fire in her eyes and defiance in her stance had slapped him like he was nothing more than a common street harasser. As his men rushed to his side in the aftermath, hands reaching for concealed weapons, Yuseo raised one hand to stop them. "Leave her," he commanded quietly, his eyes still locked on Arya's retreating figure. "Find out everything about her. Where she lives, where she works, who she knows. Everything. But don't touch her." His lieutenant, a scarred man named Do-yun, looked confused. "Boss, she assaulted you in public. We can't let this disrespect stand." Yuseo touched his still bleeding lip again, studying the crimson on his fingertips with an expression that was almost reverent. "She didn't know who I was," he murmured, more to himself than to his subordinates. "She looked at me and saw just a man. Just a man she thought was harassing her. Do you know how long it's been since anyone has looked at me and seen just a man?" His voice had taken on a strange quality, something almost vulnerable beneath the dangerous edge. Then his expression hardened again, the moment of weakness vanishing like smoke. "Find her. I want to know everything by tonight." Across the city, Arya was trying to calm her racing heart as she climbed the narrow stairs to her tiny apartment in Itaewon. Her hands were still shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline and anger. She couldn't believe she'd done it, couldn't believe she'd actually struck a stranger in the middle of a public market. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her head, the warnings she'd given before Arya left Nigeria. "The world is not kind to women who fight back," her grandmother had said. "But sometimes fighting back is the only way to stay human." She unlocked her door and stepped into the cramped studio that served as both home and sanctuary, setting her shopping bags on the tiny kitchen counter. Through the single window, she could see the sprawling cityscape of Seoul, a forest of steel and glass that had never quite felt like home. She had come here chasing dreams of education and opportunity, of building something her family could be proud of. Instead, she found herself trapped in a cycle of low-wage jobs and casual racism, invisible to most, and exotic curiosity to others. She was tired, so desperately tired, and for just one moment when that man had grabbed her with such casual entitlement, all that exhaustion had transformed into rage. She didn't regret the slap. Even as her rational mind warned her that she might have made things complicated for herself, her soul felt lighter than it had in months. There was power in that moment of defiance, a reclaiming of agency she'd been slowly losing in this foreign land. She smiled to herself as she began unpacking groceries, humming an old Afrobeat song her mother used to sing. She had no idea that at that very moment, across the city in a luxury penthouse that overlooked the Han River, a dangerous man was studying her photograph with an intensity that made his most hardened soldiers uncomfortable. The photograph had been easy to obtain, a quick bribe to a market vendor, access to a security camera, and Yuseo's tech team had not only identified her, but compiled a complete dossier within hours. Arya Sebastian, 26 years old, from Lagos, Nigeria, student visa, working part-time at a convenience store, a cafe, and as an English tutor. No criminal record, no connections to any organizations, no family in Korea. Alone and vulnerable, like a lamb wandering through a forest of wolves. His finger traced the outline of her face in the photo. Even captured in the grainy security footage, her beauty was undeniable. Dark skin that seemed to glow even under poor lighting, eyes that sparkled with intelligence and defiance, a smile that the camera had caught in an unguarded moment that made something in his chest constrict, painfully. He had encountered countless women in his life. Some had been drawn to his power, others to his money, many to the dangerous allure of his reputation. They had all wanted something from him, had all approached him with calculated seduction or fearful submission. But she had looked at him with disgust, pure, righteous disgust, and then she had struck him, The absurdity of it made him laugh, a genuine sound that startled Do-hyun standing guard at the door. "Find out her schedule," Yuseo ordered. "I want to know where she'll be tomorrow. And prepare a gift, something appropriate." "Boss," Do-hyun ventured carefully, "what exactly are your intentions with this woman?" Yuseo was quiet for a long moment, his eyes still fixed on the photograph. "I'm going to apologize to her," he finally said, "and then I'm going to make her mine." The words came out with the same certainty he used when ordering executions or planning territorial expansions. In his world, there was no difference between wanting something and taking it. The next morning, Arya was working her shift at the convenience store, restocking shelves and trying not to think about her encounter from the previous day when the door chimed and he walked in. She recognized him immediately. The expensive coat was gone, replaced with a simple black sweater and jeans, but there was no mistaking those sharp features or those unsettling eyes. Her body went rigid, hand tightening around the juice bottle she'd been shelving. He approached the counter slowly, hands visible and empty, a small wrapped box in one palm. She noticed the fading bruise at the corner of his mouth, where her slap had landed. "Good morning," he said in that same velvet steel voice. "I believe we got off on the wrong foot yesterday. I came to apologize." Arya's eyes narrowed. "Get out." His smile was gentle, almost sad. "I understand your reaction. What I did was inappropriate. I grabbed you without permission, invaded your personal space. You had every right to defend yourself. I'm sorry." The apology sounded genuine, but Arya had learned long ago that smooth words from dangerous men were the most treacherous. "How did you find me?" His expression didn't change. "I asked around. You're not exactly invisible in this neighborhood. A beautiful African woman with fire in her soul. People remember you." There was something in the way he said beautiful that made her skin prickle with awareness. Not the crude appreciation she was used to, but something darker, more possessive. "I don't want your apology," she said firmly, "and I don't want whatever is in that box. Now leave before I call my manager." He set the box on the counter anyway, his movements slow and deliberate. "It's just a small token. Traditional Korean honey butter. I noticed you were buying ingredients for baking yesterday. I thought you might appreciate quality products." Then he did something unexpected. He bowed. A full, formal bow of respect, deep and sincere. "I truly am sorry for my behavior. I hope you can forgive me." And with that, he turned and left, the door chiming softly behind him. Arya stared at the wrapped box on the counter, her mind reeling. Something about the entire interaction felt wrong, too calculated, too smooth. But beneath her suspicion was a treacherous flutter of something else. No one in this country had ever bowed to her like that, with such genuine respect. No one had ever apologized so thoroughly for making her uncomfortable. She picked up the box intending to throw it away, but found herself unwrapping it instead. Inside was the most expensive honey butter she'd ever seen, the kind she'd only glimpsed in high-end grocery stores she couldn't afford to shop in. There was a card, handwritten in elegant Korean and English. "Everyone deserves to be treated with respect. I hope I can prove I'm not the man you think I am." Signed simply, with a name. Kang Yuseo. She should have thrown it away. Every instinct screamed that accepting anything from this man was dangerous. But she was so tired of instant ramen and cheap ingredients, so weary of denying herself even small pleasures. She kept the honey butter. It was the first of many gifts. Over the following weeks, Yuseo appeared in her life with the persistence of a summer storm. Never threatening, never demanding, just present. He showed up at the cafe where she worked, ordering coffee and sitting quietly in the corner with a book, his eyes occasionally finding hers. He was there when she left her tutoring sessions, leaning against an expensive car, offering her a ride she always refused. He sent flowers to her apartment, always traditional Korean varieties with cards, explaining their meanings in both languages. The other workers noticed. The cafe manager pulled her aside with concern. "Do you know who that man is?" she asked in broken English. "He is very dangerous. You should stay away." But Arya was beginning to realize that staying away was not an option Yuseo was going to get to her. One evening, as she was walking home through a light rain, a car pulled up beside her. She didn't need to look to know who it was. "Get in," Yuseo's voice came through the open window. "You'll catch cold. I'd rather catch pneumonia than get in a car with a stranger," she shot back, continuing to walk. The car kept pace with her. "I'm not a stranger anymore. You know my name. I know yours. I know you take your coffee with 2 sugars and no cream. I know you hum when you're concentrating on work. I know you call your mother every Sunday at exactly 2 in the afternoon. The stalker behavior should have terrified her. Instead, it ignited something in her chest, a mix of anger and something else she didn't want to name. Stop following me. Not until you agree to have dinner with me. One dinner, Arya. Give me one chance to prove I'm more than the man who made a terrible first impression." She stopped walking, turning to face the car, the rain plastering her braids to her face. "Why? Why are you doing this?" For the first time, she saw his mask crack completely. He stepped out of the car, heedless of the rain that immediately began soaking his expensive clothes, and stood before her with an expression of raw vulnerability that took her breath away. "Because you're the first person in 10 years who has looked at me and seen just a man," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Because when you slapped me, you weren't afraid. You were angry. Do you know what a gift that is? To be treated like an ordinary man capable of ordinary mistakes, instead of a monster to be feared or a prize to be won." The rain fell harder, but neither of them moved. "Because I've spent every day since that moment trying to understand why a single slap from a stranger felt more honest than every interaction I've had in years," he continued, stepping closer. "Because your fire woke something in me I thought was dead. Because I'm obsessed with you, Arya Sebastian, and I don't know how to stop." She should have run. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to turn around and disappear into the rainy soul streets. But she was tired of running, tired of being invisible, tired of denying herself things she wanted simply because they were dangerous. And God help her, she wanted him. Wanted the way he looked at her like she was precious. Wanted the intensity of his attention, the careful respect he showed her boundaries even as he tested them. Wanted to matter to someone in this lonely city. "One dinner," she heard herself say. "But I choose the place. And you answer every question I ask honestly." His smile was radiant, transforming his cold features into something almost beautiful. Deal. That dinner changed everything. In a small Nigerian restaurant she'd discovered in Itawan, over jollof rice and plantains, Yuseo told her the truth. Not all of it, not the darkest parts, but enough. Enough about his empire, his power, the blood on his hands. Enough that she should have left screaming. Instead, she asked, "Are you going to hurt me?" "Never," he swore, and something in his eyes made her believe him. "Are you going to hurt people I care about? Only if they hurt you first." The honesty was terrifying and thrilling. He wasn't pretending to be someone he wasn't hiding behind comfortable lies. And when she told him about her own darkness, the loneliness that sometimes made her want to disappear, the exhaustion of always having to be strong, always having to prove herself, he listened with an intensity that made her feel truly heard for the first time in years. Their relationship unfolded like a dangerous dance. He introduced her to his world slowly, carefully, always giving her the choice to walk away. She met his men, saw the respect and fear in their eyes when they looked at him, understood the weight of power he carried, and in private moments, in the sanctuary of his penthouse or her tiny apartment, she discovered the man beneath the monster. The way he loved old jazz music and could cook traditional Korean dishes with surprising skill. The scar on his shoulder from a knife fight when he was 17. The photograph he kept hidden of a younger sister who had died. The tragedy that had set him on his dark path. And he discovered her. The brilliant woman who had taught herself Korean by watching dramas and reading children's books. The daughter who sent most of her earnings home to support her siblings' education. The poet who wrote verses in her native Yoruba about stars and belonging. the survivor who had crossed an ocean alone and refused to break. They were fire and gasoline, dangerous and inevitable. His men worried he was becoming weak, distracted by this foreign woman who had no place in their world. Her friends, the few she'd made, begged her to leave before she got hurt, but they couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. 6 months after that first slap, Yuseo took her to a private beach house outside Seoul. The ocean stretched before them like liquid silver under the moonlight, and he pulled her close, his lips brushing her temple. "I need to tell you something," he murmured. "I didn't grab you by accident that day in the market. I'd been watching you for weeks, trying to find the courage to approach you. When I finally did, I panicked and did the stupidest thing possible." She pulled back to look at him, eyes wide. "You were stalking me before I even slapped you?" He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I prefer the term admiring from a distance. But yes, you were this bright, fierce presence in my gray world, and I didn't know how to approach someone like you normally. So I made a terrible choice and paid for it with the best slap I've ever received." She should have been angry. Instead, she started laughing, the sound carrying across the empty beach. "You're insane. Completely insane." "Insanely in love with you," he corrected, and then caught himself, eyes widening slightly, as if surprised by his own words. Arya's laughter faded, her heart pounding. "What did you say?" He cupped her face in his hands, those dangerous hands that had done terrible things, but held her like she was made of starlight. "I love you, Arya. I've loved you since you looked at me with disgust instead of fear. Since you slapped me and walked away like I was nothing. Since you gave me a chance to be something other than what I've always been. And I know I don't deserve you. No, I'm everything you should run from, but I'm asking you to stay anyway." The ocean whispered against the shore. The moon painted them in silver. And Arya made her choice. She kissed him, pouring into it all the loneliness and longing, all the fear and defiance that had brought them to this moment. When they finally broke apart, she smiled against his lips. "I love you too, you ridiculous, dangerous, obsessive man. But if you ever grab another woman like that, I'll slap you again." "Promise?" he murmured, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Promise." They stood there on that beach. Two people who should never have fit together, who had found in each other something neither had known they were missing. The African girl who had refused to be a victim, and the Mafia boss who had been humanized by a single slap. Their story was far from over. There would be complications, dangers, the constant threat of his world colliding with her dreams. But in that moment, wrapped in each other's arms, with the ocean as their witness, they were simply Arya and Yuseo, two souls who had found each other in the chaos of Seoul, who had turned a moment of violence into the beginning of something beautiful and terrible and absolutely undeniable. And it all started with a slap that echoed through a crowded marketplace, a slap that changed two lives forever. If you love this dangerous romance that started with one unforgettable slap, don't forget to subscribe to K-Drama Fairy Tales for more thrilling stories of forbidden love and unexpected connections. Hit that like button if you're Team Arya and Yuseo. Drop a comment telling us what you'd do if you accidentally slapped a mafia boss, and share this video with someone who loves intense romance stories. See you in the next fairy tale, lovers.